Welcome. This is a lecture on learning theories, and you may be asking, why do we need to know learning theories? So first and foremost, understanding how people learn or how they believe they learn informs what you do as an instructor in a higher ed classroom. So the learning theory that underpins your instruction and kind of informs your teaching philosophy is really reflected in your pedagogy and those assignments that you create or other learning tasks that you ask of students all comes from what you truly believe in your soul, how people learn, right? So this is an important concept for not only creating assignments in your courses, which you will do through a syllabus assignment, but also the writing of your teaching philosophy. And if you're in higher ed or you plan to be in higher ed, it's really important that you're able to articulate that when you interview. So having a teaching philosophy is one piece of the application process in higher ed. So this PowerPoint is kind of going to review some of those predominant educational learning theories, and hopefully it serves to help build your case for that teaching philosophy assignment that I will require you to do in this course, and hopefully will help you moving forward in your career if you plan to go into higher ed. So there I am. And the question I'm asking you to ponder is how do you think students learn best? So take a moment, ask yourself how you believe students learn best. Maybe this requires kind of an inward self-reflection of how you believe you learn best. So thinking about from your own perspective and your own learning experiences, how do you learn best? What assignments did you engage in as a student? Whether it be as an adult or as a child that really made an impact on you. And why did it make an impact? Did you make personal connections to the content, or did it connect to your previous learning? Those are questions you want to think about. With a basic understanding of learning theories, we can create lessons and learning tasks that enhance the learning process. This understanding helps us explain our instructional choices. It helps to situate what we teach, how we teach, and why we teach. So thinking about those things, I think, will really help move you forward in this course, but also in that assignment of the teaching philosophy. So before we get into it, there's kind of two concepts that are very relevant today when we think about learning theories. So historically in educational circles, there was a lot of talk about learning styles. So a lot of controversy still exists. Some believing learning styles are evidence-based and backed by science, and others arguing just the opposite. If you do a cursory review or a cursory search on the internet, you will find a lot of information defending both sides. I like to call how we learn best a learning preference. So by definition, a learning style can be described as a set of factors, behaviors, and attitudes that facilitate learning for an individual in a given situation. In contrast, learning preferences or learning modalities, that's a set of conditions related to learning which are most conducive to retaining information for an individual. So whatever side of the aisle you sit, one variable is of utmost importance, and that is understanding your students and their learning and helping them understand themselves. And I believe that's really important for adult learners. When working with adults, many already have a preconceived notion of the learning situation. But by providing many opportunities, kind of many chances for students to display their learning, I think the chances are that they will find one that will stick for them. Another topic, this second bullet, another topic for consideration in learning is the idea of brain-based learning. That is learning that is based on cognitive science and how students learn best, right? So how the brain operates when we're learning. Some researchers contend that we teach brains, not students, and learning has to be constructed in ways that allow those pathways to be connected in the brain. Simple strategies you may remember as a child or actually you may use as a teacher, if you are a teacher, are those brain breaks that we give young children, right? We take time to activate the brain by getting up, by moving around, by including music or including art in what we do. And many believe that's effective ways to insert brain-based learning into what we do. So those two concepts, I think, are something that you want to think about as you're kind of developing what learning theories underpin what you do as an instructor. So the first learning theory that we're going to take a look at is cognitive learning theory. So cognitive learning theory looks at the way people think. Mental processes are an important part in understanding how we learn. Secondly, cognitive theory understands that learners can be influenced by both internal and external elements. So Plato was kind of the first philosopher that focused on cognition and how human beings think, and then later Piaget kind of got the party started when he focused heavily on the environment and the internal structures that impact learning. So something that I think is important that you keep in your mind is that cognitive theory has developed over a long period of time, and there's a lot of sub-theories that we're not going to discuss here that really focus on kind of the unique elements of learning and understanding. We're not going to cover those, but absolutely, if that's something you're interested in, or if you have a strong background in education, you may be familiar with those elements. But at the most basic level, cognitive theory suggests that internal thoughts and external forces are both important parts of the cognitive process. And when students understand their own thought process, they're able to take more ownership or autonomy of their learning. And another kind of central piece to this cognitive learning theory is the idea of metacognition, right? And in education, we always kind of throw this term out and we say, oh, it's thinking about thinking, right? Being cognizant of what you're doing while you're learning is an important part of that, as well as opportunities that allow children or adults to construct their own learning opportunities. So that's kind of the overview of cognitive learning theory. But something important, I have this figure for you, something important that you'll see kind of surface in some of the other learning theories is this idea of the learning cycle and the schema, right, that we create in our minds, and that the more we add through opportunities of learning, the stronger that schema becomes. And I always explain this to my pre-service teachers, excuse me, as a file folder in the head. So all of us come to their learning experience a little bit differently, right? And my file folder has many, many things in it, while your file folder may not, or vice versa. But it's an important part of cognitive learning theory that as an instructor, we can provide opportunities that add to that schemata. Depends who you are, how you say it. Potato. So that's the overview of cognitive learning theory. The second one is behaviorism, and that's probably something that we're all familiar with in psych. And it really is the idea that how a student behaves is based on their interaction with the environment. So the environment plays a key piece. It also suggests that behaviors are influenced and learned from external factors rather than internal factors. Psychologists have been developing the idea of behaviorism since the 19th century, right? And it's the basis for psychology that has been observed and quantified over many, many years. In the classic Pavlov's dog, the classical conditioning that we know so well suggests that behaviors are directly motivated by the reward, the carrot, that can be obtained. And for students, that's grades, that's points, that's recognition, and that motivates some students. And if you're a teacher in basic ed in the K-12 world, you would argue sometimes that does not motivate, and you're absolutely right. You are absolutely right. But if you have a philosophy that is kind of situated in this learning theory, you would create environments or create coursework or create learning tasks that come from that point of view. So in behaviorism, positive reinforcement is often used to help students better learn a concept. According to some researchers, students who receive positive reinforcements are more likely to retain the information moving forward, and that's really a direct result of this theory. The argument kind of on the other side of this is that we're doing more damage by using external forces, positive reinforcements, to help children or to help young adults or adult students to motivate them to do well. So there's a great book by Alfie Cohen, published in '93, called Punished by Rewards. And I believe the subtitle was something along the lines, you're punished by rewards. The trouble with gold stars, incentive plans, A's, praise, and other bribes. And that book really was revolutionary in 1993 because it gave parents and teachers, pause and thought, wow, have we been doing this wrong? Are we doing more damage by motivating kids externally than we thought? And for some instances, that may actually damage them in the long run. I'm just presenting the information. It's neither here nor there how I feel about it, but it's something to think about. When you look at this figure on behavioral learning, you'll notice number one, right, forms of learning focus on the observable changes in behavior and disregard the activities of the mind. So this external force is driving the learning. It ignores thought, motivation, and cognition, and ignores the social dimensions of learning. If you believe those are important, this would not be the learning theory that drives your teaching philosophy. The third learning theory is the constructivist learning theory, and this is based on the premise that students create their own learning based on previous experiences. So those schemas from earlier really become important because let's think of a kindergartner, for instance. We're going to talk about the beach. Well, some children have a file folder with lots of information in that file folder. Some kids have a file folder and there's nothing in there. They've never experienced it. They've never seen it. Maybe they've only seen it on TV, still an experience, but those file folders are uneven, right? And in the constructivist learning theory, it's really based on the idea that students create their own learning based on previous experiences, and those mental models or schemas, that's really where they're built. So students take what they're being taught and they add it to their previous knowledge and experiences. So they're piling on. And when they pile on, their conceptions can change. And I often tell students, but many times those file folders have misconceptions in them, and your teaching may change those misconceptions. Those folders kind of build the knowledge, and it creates the reality that is unique to the students. So your understanding of teaching in higher ed may be much different than mine based on our own experience and learning, right? So I've been doing it for a while. My file folder is pretty full. You may teach in higher ed, but you've only done it a couple years. Maybe your file folder isn't as full, or your file folder is empty, right? You haven't done it. Your only experiences have been as a student, and that's a different perspective, although an important perspective. In constructivism, learning is viewed as an active process, right? And the individual is central to that, and the learning is individualized to that person, and background knowledge is really an important part of this. And, important to note, students bring that knowledge to the classroom. They have to build that learning, and I have found in my own teaching that my teaching philosophy does have some constructivism as part of it. Here's a great visual. You notice all the circles around, right? Active engagement. We want students doing something. And how do they engage, right? They bring that background to them. Their culture plays an important part, their perspective, and the ability to problem solve. But central to all of this really is the student and their experiences. All right, the fourth one is humanism. And this is kind of closely related to constructivism in many ways. It really closely aligns with it when you look at those side by side. So self-actualization is really a focus of humanism. Now, if you think about back from your psych class, that Maslow's hierarchy of needs, that really kind of plays a part in the humanism learning theory because it's the highest level of psychological development, where when students are at that highest level, their personal potential is fully realized, right? So it's conducive to learning when students when they meet that highest level of self-actualization. The theory also informs us that everyone kind of functions under this hierarchy of needs, and we are not always in that highest level of self-actualization. But when our emotional needs, when our physical needs are met, we absolutely can be at our best and learning can occur. Now, this might take you back to freshman year, Psych 101. That's okay, because I want you to take a moment, excuse me, and think about this from a college or university perspective more globally. So not your higher ed classroom, but think about a college campus. So whether you're in administration, you're in student services, you're in the dean's office for the university, you're in athletics, whatever your role may be, when you think about this, it kind of makes sense. So when our students have their food, they have their shelter, they feel love, they feel belonging, all of those things are optimal for students to learn. So I think even though it's Maslow been around forever, right? We've known about this, but it makes sense on a college campus because it really is a microcosm of society, right? It's this little world that they live in, and all of their needs need to be met in order for them to learn. I think it makes sense when you think about it from this context, when kids do not feel like they belong on campus for whatever reason, whether it's sexuality, whether it's race, whether it's religion, gender-based, they absolutely have to feel like they belong and they have space to be who they are in order for learning to occur. Now, in a higher ed classroom, I believe that's even more important. So, things to think about. Does that inform what you do in a higher ed classroom? That's the question for the teaching philosophy. The fifth one, Connectivism. This is kind of one of the newest educational learning theories, and it focuses on the idea that people learn and grow by making, you guessed. Here's a very simple figure that kind of gives you the lowdown on Connectivism, right? There's the context, there's the technologies that play an important part, there's the content, and absolutely the students, and I like how it calls them learning subjects. So it's interesting when you contrast this with, let's say, humanism, right? That we refer to them as subjects. And then the sixth, transformative learning theory. Before we go on, those first 5 learning theories are really the mainstays in educational learning theories. But I wanted to present these others for a very important reason, because many of these are applicable to higher ed. And you're going to see what I mean when we move on. So, the first one, transformative learning theory, it's a great approach for adult education and for adult or young adult learning. It's also referred to often in the literature as transformation learning. Transformative learning theory focuses on the idea that learners can adjust their thinking when presented with new information. Jack Mezirow was the founding father of this theory when he conducted studies with adult women who went back to school. So that's kind of why it makes sense that it's applicable to adults or to adolescent learners. In his work, he found that adults don't apply their old understanding to new situations, and that having a new perspective helped them gain a new understanding of things as they change. He believed that students had important teaching and learning opportunities connected to their past experiences, and that critical reflection and review could lead to a transformation of their understanding. So this theory, as I mentioned, is typically applicable to adults, to adolescents, and they don't have the same kind of transformation with their learning and with their life experiences as young children. So adult students can draw on childhood experiences and transform those beliefs and understanding using critical reflection, leaning or them into understanding what they should believe and understand. So that transformation over time when they learn information. This theory also kind of states that our worldview is changed the more we learn. And I think that's true in life, right? The more we learn, the better we do, kind of adage. By gaining new information, that helps us evaluate past ideas, and I think students are able to make a dramatic educational shift beyond the standard or typical learning. And this theory is situated in this idea of changing your thoughts, changing your behaviors, where students really start to kind of question their assumption and their biases over time. If you look at the figure, you'll notice that there's these 4 key steps, and notice number 2 is that critical reflection, right? That internal dialogue that they have with themselves, and then collaborate with others and implement that change or that learning in some way. The 7th is the social learning theory. It's most notably known for Bandura's Bobo doll experiment. So if you don't know about this experiment, by all means, I have a YouTube there for you. There's 2. I'm not going to show it because you can watch those on your own. But it was interesting work in social modeling, both positive and negative. So when you look at the Bobo experiment, it's negative. So adults kind of beat up this doll, and then they leave kids alone with this doll to see how they're going to interact with the doll. I mean, obviously that's negative because there was violence. But his theory is that social modeling really has a great impact on learning. And I think that's an important concept for higher ed in many, many regards. So the kind of the 4 elements of social learning includes attention, retention, reproduction, and motivation. So when you look at Bandura's work, and you may be familiar with his work, most notably in self-efficacy. I've done a lot of work in self-efficacy, and a lot of his stuff is situated in that, when you feel confident in being able to do something, you will perceive yourself as being successful, if that makes sense. And here is our last and, most important, and that is experiential learning theory. It's important for this class because it's in the syllabus assignment, where I require you to include an EL assignment. So this one's a little more in depth. I do a little bit more with this so that you understand what's going to be required of you in that assignment. So around 1984, Kolb comes up with this. He was really influenced by Dewey, Piaget, and his theory states that learning occurs through meaningful opportunities. And not only meaningful opportunities, but also reflection on those opportunities. In its purest form, EL means learning from experience and learning by doing. So when you think about a higher ed classroom, or even at the program level, you're thinking about field work, right? Internships. That they're taking what they've learned and they're applying it. We immerse students in learning, and then we encourage them to reflect. They develop new skills, new attitudes, and new ways of. So, two types of experiential learning. We have classroom-based, and then there's field-based. So field-based, I mentioned earlier, internships, cooperative ed, any sort of service learning. At Robert Morris, our undergrads are required to do service learning. We have different categories of service learning, and they're required, I think there's 6 now, they're required to do 2 of the 6. Students who do all 6 are awarded at graduation with, I can't remember even what the award's name. Well, doesn't matter. But we encourage them to do service learning. In my world, because I'm in education, their pre-student teaching, their student teaching, all their field experiences that are connected to coursework. That is EL, right? It's field-based. But there's also this idea of classroom-based where you can role play, do case studies, games, collaborative group work. If you look at the work by Chickering and Gamson, they really they do a lot of work in adult learning, and they support the idea of EL, right? That when you have undergrads practicing what they're learning, that's preparing them for the future. They're taking the content, they're applying it, and then they're reflecting on that and changing what they do. So here's the circle. Concrete experience, right? Reflective observation, abstract conceptualization, and then active experimentation. So when you look at these 4 quadrants, it's interesting, and that's what in the syllabus assignment, I want you to create something that will allow your students to go through those quadrants. The benefits of EL and higher ed is we do want our students doing real world experiences, right? We're preparing them for a world beyond college, right? For the workforce. So providing assignments that allow them to engage in, take the content and apply it in some way is important. We want them creating relationships and working closely with the community or other stakeholders so that they're making those connections and they're learning from people who are doing. And I think many times coursework in higher ed is so disconnected from that. The other benefit, the third benefit, is the idea of bringing people together so that students have experiences in diverse settings. And those are the settings in which they will work one day. So as you think about not only your teaching philosophy, but more importantly, not more importantly, as important, is the syllabus assignment. What will you create that will allow them to experience that? Now, when creating that assignment, maybe that will inform your own teaching. So if you take a look at the assignment, you'll notice the syllabus assignment. You'll notice in the rubric that an EL experience is required. And when you create that, you want to think of a couple things. Here's the piece of I'm showing you the piece of the syllabus. What will you ask? What will the learning task be? Right? What's the goal of the learning task? What am I asking students to do? And often I ask myself, why am I asking them to do it? What are you asking students to do? How will they engage and reflect? And then how will you assess that? So as we move through the semester, the learning theories can serve in many purposes, but most importantly, in your teaching philosophy. Is your teaching philosophy a combination of these? So I hope you enjoyed our learning theories. Next up will be the teaching philosophy, and I look forward to speaking with you soon.